Hello and welcome back to the second part of Module 10, 10b, where we pose the question once again, do men and women think differently? And we talked about the idea in the early 60s and 70s with feminists who believed that men and women thought exactly the same. Other than physiological differences and the ability to give birth, for women of course, men and women were essentially the same. We could think and rationalize the same way. But in the third wave, in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, the idea changed a little bit. And the notion was that, well, yes, women do think differently, but there's not a value judgment attached to this difference. In other words, women don't think better or worse than men and vice versa. So it is important because in tests that have been conducted by sociologists and psychologists, it's turned out that the level of empathy and care that men and women have and their views of interpersonal relationships are essentially the same. And so when we consider the fact that men and women think differently about ethics, we need to ask ourselves, well, why is that? What's happened in society and what's happened in human development, and especially moral development, for us to consider that this is in fact a possibility? The first idea is, and I mentioned this again in the previous slides, the private realm in which women have traditionally been situated. And this would be the realm of family and friends. And when you consider that the realm in which women were finding themselves in, and the kinds of moral theories that were being generated by men in the public sphere, the notion of a private sphere was not even considered. It was not seen. It was a blind spot in moral philosophy because the traditional theories of obligation, of duty, this would be Immanuel Kant, applied ethics, right, utilitarianism, and so on. These views of morality really did not take into account relationships. They were very based on means and ends, right, and costs and benefits. And so if that's the case, those traditional theories really don't describe family dynamics very well, if they even see it at all. So the idea of equality and impartiality is also very difficult to maintain in a private realm of family and friends. To be impartial is virtually impossible. And if you try to be, you're considered cold and distant. So the notions attached with traditional theories of morality and ethics, which is equality, impartiality, objectivity, just don't work in that private realm of family and friends. Instead, and here's the solution, the ethics of care, right? It's much better suited in articulating, defining, and expressing these various interpersonal relationships between families and friends, neighbors and communities, and so on. Ethics of care, it doesn't take those theories of obligation as fundamental, right? There's some flexibility, nor does it require that we look at people impartially and promote the interests of everyone alike. We may have favorites, right? There may be people that you're going to look out for more so than others. So the notion of impartiality is really something that exists with great difficulty in the private realm that women are traditionally associated with, which is why the theories that express these kinds of ideas seem to be at odds with the lifestyle of women in our society. The second one is the notion of poverty and benevolence. Once again, traditional theories such as the utilitarian perspective of helping the poor, Peter Singer's applied ethics, right? If you have surplus wealth, you must give it away, not should. You must give it away. Otherwise, you're being unethical. Now, that's really difficult, right? When you are considering worldwide poverty, that's a huge realm. That's a huge, series of problems. And so if that's the case, perhaps an ethics of care might be the better way to go, because rather than thinking of it as a global issue, you can think of it as a local issue. And you could volunteer in a food bank. You could volunteer in a soup kitchen. You could actually work to help the homeless right in your own neighborhood. And that notion of duty and utilitarian care it's there, but it's there implicitly. What's really happening is connecting with your immediate environment, right? Of friends, family, neighbors, community, and so on. And especially those at risk, those that are disadvantaged, those that are living in poverty or homeless. And so that ethics of care can focus on those smaller scale relationships that can carry on for a period of time. And okay, so you're not dealing with worldwide poverty, but you're dealing with a poverty of people that you see every day, right? That you get to know. So this is how different, let's say, Peter Singer's view of a utilitarian perspective in terms of, solving the issue of poverty and ethics of care say, yes, we can do that. But why don't we start locally, right? And why don't we start in our own backyard? So if you can do that, an ethical life would include, caring for personal relationships, family, friends, neighbors, right in that immediate community. And you can still support UNICEF, World Vision, United Way, and whoever else. So you can then make your ethical relationships with the world sort of more robust, more enhanced, because you are now sort of viewing the notion of worldwide poverty, or at least poverty, as a serious matter, as it should, but you're doing it on a local level. You're seeing the difference. You're seeing the change that your attitude towards this problem is having. And you see through this ethics of care how valuable some of these relationships can actually be. The third issue, too, is animal welfare. And that's not to say that men don't care about animals. In this particular case, in understanding how women view moral relationships through social relationships, this also is an important component in at least allowing us to understand the tradition of it. And so an ethics of care, when we're talking about pets, may not be the best way to look at things, but whether or not your animal responds, it has more to do with the way you feel about yourself in terms of the pet that you take care of. And so if that is the case, you can find yourself caring for animals at large. You may decide to become vegan and have a strictly vegetarian diet. All of this really kind of comes to the same issue, which is an ethics of care, caring about the environment, caring about the animal welfare of non-human animals. So if that's the case, then ethics of care becomes now another component, not something sidelined or some sort of issue that's sort of occasionally looked at. No, it becomes a very important central component of a general sense of morality. So it does not belong in a sort of, segregated somewhere else. No, it is all part of a larger purview of moral relationships and morality in general. So what does this mean now, finally? And again, this is a very, very brief set of slides. What does this mean? Okay, the contrast between a certain kind of person doing one's duty relates to a larger conflict between two kinds of ethical theories. You have, on the one hand, virtue ethics, right? You have the idea of a person being kind and generous, courageous. This will be Aristotle's ideas that we'll look at next week. Now, deontology, by its very nature, is counterintuitive to an ethics of care. Now, yes, Kant says, do no harm, do not use people as a means to an end, do not lie, all fine and good. But he also is asking us, Kant is also asking us to be impartial and objective and listen only to reason. That is really difficult when you are in the private realm of family and friends. To be impartial and objective is very difficult because they're your kids, right? Or they're your family. They're your parents and brothers and sisters. It is almost impossible to be impartial. And so certain moral perspectives, certain moral standpoints really are at odds with an ethics of caring because, as I pointed out, the notion of impartiality and objectivity becomes very difficult to maintain in private relationships, in a private realm. And this is the realm that women have traditionally been found in, but they have brought to us this new view of society that we can be still interpersonal. We still can be empathetic and sympathetic and care for others without in any way sort of questioning or destroying other moral viewpoints. What ethics of care is asking is to make room for this other perspective. So utilitarian, deontological, ethics of care, they each have the good and bad points, but certainly a viewpoint of ethics of care focuses on not the opposite of impartiality being partiality, but it focuses on context. It focuses on individuals. It focuses on those people that are at the center of the moral dilemma. So if that's the case, right, virtue ethics is well suited to accommodate some of these values that we find in both the public and the private life. And because these are issues that can be articulated very clearly and very straightforwardly, this is not something that men cannot learn. Of course we can. And so what Carol Gilligan from the last set of slides in the other module, what she is asking us to consider is for men to enter into the same realm so that we can take an ethics of care or virtue ethics, but certainly an ethics of care here, and bring that into the public realm so that we can interact with one another on a more respectful level, right? So there is a degree of partiality, if that's a word, because these are the people that are in our immediate orbit, right? In our immediate surroundings. So there really is nothing wrong with that. It's you think globally but act locally. You've heard that expression. This is kind of the same thing. Ethics of care is acting locally, acting on behalf of individuals that you see on an everyday basis, family and friends, individuals you see on the street, and extending that moral hand out to those people and helping them firstly. Because in that sense, yes, you're partial, but you're partial in the sense that these are the people you see. You interact with them on a daily basis. You can't be impartial and objective to friends. It's very, very difficult. So that's essentially it. That's the whole lesson. Very brief, but also very important. Again, studies on interrelationships between gender and sex, emotion, and morality have noticed that women score slightly higher in terms of empathy. And the question becomes why? Well, because of the environments in which women have traditionally found themselves in the private realm. And the private realm is made up primarily of these personal relationships. Personal relationships are typically not something you find in the public realm of contract signing and running for office and things like that. You're making relationships, but they're trans-relational in the sense that, you do something for me, I'll do something for you. There's always a means and an end and a cost and a benefit. You're dealing with equations, right? You're dealing with equations in the public realm while you're dealing with people, family and friends in the private realm. And this is where this essentially is coming from. So in terms of the way that women think, the belief through sociological studies and psychological studies that the fact that women have dealt with family and friends more so than men, their notion of charity is slightly different in that women are traditionally going to more likely act on a local level. And then finally, the notion of animal welfare, kind of an overall sense of benevolence to the world that extends also to the environment as well as to animals and human beings. A general sense of care that is moving well beyond that private realm into the public realm. Individuals that worry about the environment, they're engaged in an ethics of care. And that's not to say that it exists privately, sort of in that realm of the family. No, it exists right across the board. People are concerned about the world. So they protest against gun violence. They protest against burning down the Amazon forest. That's an ethics of caring. And it's certainly something that men and women can get behind. So the reason why women have been thinking this way traditionally is because the male public relationships are impersonal and contractual, while female private relationships are personal and affective. They deal more so with emotions. And those different voices that come out of those emotional relationships are the very things that Carol Gilligan was talking about in her book, this one here that we talked about in the last set of modules. So compared to other moral theories, utilitarianism and deontology, ethics of care is dealing more with people rather than equations, rather than contracts or a sense of impartiality and duty. No, that's not as important as connecting through kindness, through generosity, through courage, and so on. And these things can be done through an ethics of caring. So that's essentially it. That's the whole lesson, all in less than 15 minutes. There you go. So those are the two parts about the ethics of caring and whether or not men and women think differently. They do, but now we know why historically. But that's not to say that men cannot learn from women to also conduct their public business with also an ethics of caring. So we're going to see each other either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on which group you're in. I've opened up the quizzes for the quiz, I should say, the singular one for this week, which will be looking at sections or modules 8, 9, and 10. So we'll talk about it some more on Wednesday or Thursday. But in the meantime, we'll see you soon.